She woke up inside the story of the Phantom of the Opera. But unsettlingly, it's the horror remake. Trapped in the Phantom of the Opera, Episode 2. The last thing Polly saw was Erik flicking his wrist. His rope moved like a living creature and lashed around the manager's neck in a flash. The manager's pupils widened in shock. He clearly didn't expect to be caught by the neck, even while still on horseback. He reached for his gun, but the next second, a crisp crack echoed in the air. The manager's neck snapped, his head hanging at an unnatural angle as his body collapsed with a heavy thud. Only then did the surrounding guards wake from their daze, scrambling to draw their weapons in retaliation. Before the first gunshot fully rang out, Caesar, the horse, panicked and bolted. Caught off guard, Polly could only cling tightly to Caesar's neck, praying not to be thrown off. Gunfire continued to roar behind her, mixed with horrified shouts and curses. Yet no bullet ever hit Erik. Sometimes they clearly aimed at Erik, but ended up shooting their own men. A chill shot straight to Polly's scalp. She had bet correctly. And guessed right too. As the main character of a horror story, Erik didn't just inherit the Phantom's brilliance. He also possessed superhuman strength. In horror film history, many killers have terrifying recovery abilities. Even after being shot multiple times, they could still stand up and slowly, steadily continue the hunt. If she had chosen the manager, it would have been her head twisted off on the spot. She had escaped death once again. No one knew how long Caesar ran before finally stopping. He stood at the riverbank, snorting heavily as he drank water. Polly wanted to slip off the saddle, but when she saw the swampy mud by the river, deep, filthy, nearly swallowing the horse's knees, she thought better of it. She didn't want to test what might be hiding beneath that muck. As the fog slowly lifted, the gloomy night gave way to a faint blue-red dawn. The final blood-curdling scream echoed behind them. The one-sided slaughter had ended. Polly turned toward the sound and saw Erik walking toward her in the pale light between night and day. His white mask was soaked in blood. The eyes behind the hollow sockets no longer seemed distant and vacant. Instead, they were bright with wild excitement, like a hunter who had thoroughly enjoyed the chase. No, that wasn't right. The moment their eyes met, Polly's hair stood on end and alarm bells blared in her mind. He hadn't enjoyed the hunt enough. He wanted more. She gripped the reins tightly, her back cold and clammy with sweat. If she had known how to ride, she probably would have run the moment she saw him. Rationally, she knew she didn't need to fear him. If he wanted to kill her, he would have done it hours ago. There was no reason to let her live this long. But who could control the fear in their body? Polly could only take a deep breath, dig her nails into her palms, steady herself, and fight not to fall off the horse. Caesar had been stomping impatiently in the mud, snorting and shifting his hooves, clearly hoping she would dismount and brush him down. But as soon as Erik appeared, the horse quieted instantly, pretending to be busy nibbling grass. Polly felt the horse was too clever for its own good. She wanted to smack it. Erik approached. Polly tensed all over, bracing for him to drag her down and slit her throat to make up for his unfinished kill. Thankfully, it was just her imagination. He calmly mounted the horse behind her, took the reins from behind, and turned Caesar toward an unfamiliar direction. Polly didn't know where they were headed, and she didn't dare ask. The fog cleared and the sky brightened. Once she was sure Erik wouldn't kill her, Polly grew drowsy. She wanted nothing more than to shut her eyes and sleep forever. Suddenly, a hand slipped into her pocket. She jolted awake. It was Erik. He placed a finely crafted leather wallet into her coat. Polly took it out and turned to him. "Can I open it?" No reply. That meant yes. She opened it and found bills from various countries, British pounds, US dollars, French francs, and even a few gold coins. It had to be the manager's wallet. Since the circus toured internationally, he carried different currencies in advance. Polly had no idea how much it was worth, and Erik, of course, wouldn't explain. If she wanted to survive in this world, she'd need more friends, especially ones who could teach her basic life skills. Eventually, Polly fell asleep. When she woke again, she was inside a small makeshift tent, barely big enough for one person, lying on a wool blanket. The blanket was probably from Caesar's saddle and smelled strongly of horse sweat. Outside the tent, a fire burned warmly. Erik had arranged some stones into a circle and built a stable fire pit. He was gone, leaving Polly alone with Caesar, who stared at her in silence. After a few seconds, Polly stood and slowly approached the horse, Good horse, sweet horse. You're the best little pony in the world. Please don't move while I take down the backpack. Caesar seemed too exhausted to bother resisting. He gave her a look, then lowered his head to graze. Polly gritted her teeth and struggled for what felt like an eternity to remove the backpack from his back. By the time she succeeded, her hands were shaking. This wasn't just a backpack. It was clean underwear, clean clothes, clean blankets, clean shoes, clean water, and the sacred butter hot pot can that had kept her alive. Polly took a deep breath, dragged the backpack into the tent, and opened it as fast as she could. She found her clean underwear. Back at the circus, baths were once a week, and everyone used the same tub. Not all at once, but one after another. Polly couldn't accept that. She hadn't bathed in ages, only used wet cloths to wipe down. She tried her best, but the environment was filthy, and she had little spare clothing. She still ended up smelling like old sweat. Especially the chest binder, it was starting to sour. Now, finally, she could change into fresh, comfortable underwear. She removed the binder, wiped away sweat with a wet wipe, and slipped into a breathable sports bra. Tears nearly welled in her eyes. If she ever made it home, she'd write a 1,000-word essay praising this bra for saving her sanity in the 19th century. The backpack also held a t-shirt, long pants, and a pair of lightweight sneakers, all from reputable brands. Polly decided to wait until she found a spot free of mud and manure to change into them with proper reverence. After admiring her clothes, she closed her eyes to rest. Then, with the same awe one might offer a holy relic, she pulled out the 3-pound hot pot can. Its shelf life was 36 months, proof she could survive here for 3 years if needed. The ingredients list was clean. Beef, bone broth, and beef fat came first. The moment she smelled that familiar aroma, her nose stung and tears nearly fell. She missed home. She still hadn't taken out her phone, afraid of seeing the no-signal screen. She didn't want to face the despair of having a phone and contact list, but being unable to reach anyone she loved. Wiping her tears, Polly gathered sticks, built a tripod, and set the can over the fire. Soon, the hot pot began to boil, releasing a spicy, savory fragrance that made her mouth water. She split a pair of disposable chopsticks, picked up a chunk of beef, checked that it was cooked, and popped it in her mouth. It was piping hot, but the meat was thick, tender, and soaked in rich, salty, spicy broth. One bite, and she almost cried again, this time from sheer joy. Just then, footsteps approached. Polly looked up. Erik had returned. The blood was clean from his mask. His eyes, though still cold, were calm now, no longer wild. He carried a skinned rabbit by the legs, red and slick, dripping blood. He stopped beside the fire and stared at the bubbling hot pot. Polly tossed down her chopsticks and called, "Come eat!" Erik walked over slowly and sat beside her. Polly explained, "This is hot pot. It's kind of like fondue, except made with beef fat, broth, chilies, and lots of spices. You cook raw meat and veggies in it and eat them right away. It's spicy, maybe spicier than Mexican salsa. Have you ever had chilies?" After a long moment, he nodded. "Then, you'll be fine." She handed him a new pair of chopsticks and showed him how to use them. "Try it. It's really good." Erik studied her, then mimicked her motions, picking up a piece of beef and placing it in his mouth. He didn't care much about taste. Bitter, sour, sweet. It was all the same to him. He'd eaten raw chilies in Persia just to stay awake. Back then, the king had thrown him into a pit with death row inmates, forcing him to perform public executions, showing how to kill with just a rope. The prisoners had spears and machetes. All he had was a rope. But now, strangely, he felt satisfied. Maybe it was her eyes. They looked like they had cried, now freshly bright and full of life, like the pulsing veins on a prey animal's neck. It sparked something primal in him, the urge to pin her down, draw a blade to her eye, and watch her cry. He knew she would cry. She was timid and lazy, afraid of dirt, afraid of pain, lacking backbone. She looked at him with constant fear, like a startled rabbit. She was weak and clueless. She didn't even know how to approach a horse. Caesar had only snorted and bared his teeth a little, and she had jumped back in fright. He had to do everything for her. Sometimes he asked himself, why hadn't he killed her yet? Maybe because he enjoyed the hunt, the chase, the fear, the comfort afterward. Maybe because she had set a precedent with her touch. He was starting to crave it, sometimes even provoking her, just for the reward of her touch. He wasn't afraid of addiction, even though she still hadn't left his side. even though she kept fighting her fear, hugging him, kissing his mask, choosing him publicly without hesitation. He knew one day she would abandon him, just like his mother. The moment she first saw his face, she had screamed, fainted, gone nearly insane, then trembled as she forced a mask over his face. When that day came, he wouldn't hesitate to kill her. Polly finally had a proper meal. Her body had never experienced chili before, so by the end she was crying and sniffling as she ate. Erik, on the other hand, showed no reaction, as if he'd eaten spicier things in the past. Polly didn't think much of it. After all, chili originated in the Americas. In the original novel, he traveled across all of Europe and eventually learned terrifying rope techniques in India. With such a background, it wouldn't be surprising if he had been to the Americas. In fact, they might already be in America now. Polly's geography grades were never stellar, but she vaguely remembered that France had neither crocodiles nor coyotes. Coyotes were native to North America. She had assumed they were in France because she had heard the manager and his men speak with French accents, but she had completely forgotten that in the 19th century, many American cities still had strong French-speaking populations, like New Orleans, which had been a French and Spanish colony. That would also explain why Richard didn't just run off with the hiking backpack. New Orleans was too far from Paris. Rather than make an arduous journey to claim a reward from Louis Vuitton, it made more sense to partner with the manager. Polly forced herself to remember this lesson. From now on, think 3 times before making a move. She had assumed the people here were ignorant and simple, and that a little manipulation would make them act according to her will. But they were real people. No one becomes your pawn so easily. If it weren't for Erik's inhuman strength, she would have died at the manager's hands. Erik wouldn't always help her. He wasn't obligated to help her at all. If she wanted to survive, she had to be cautious. Always cautious. The hot pot can was too much food. Polly ate only a third before she couldn't take another bite. Erik, however, had a healthy appetite. His chopsticks barely paused. His fingers were long, nimble, and strong, surprisingly so. Many foreigners struggled when first using chopsticks to eat Chinese food, fumbling awkwardly. Erik, however, was graceful and precise, mirroring Polly's own technique. Polly finally remembered. He wasn't just a top-tier magician, but also a rare musical genius. Both professions demanded extraordinary finger dexterity. It would have been more surprising if he hadn't mastered chopsticks. Now that she thought about it, this was actually the first time he had eaten in front of her. Energy bars didn't count. Like that previous time, he lifted only the bottom of his mask, revealing a sharp, angular jaw. His chewing was minimal and elegant, almost like he'd received formal training. Considering he had once worked for royalty and been involved in political assassinations, it made sense. Polly didn't dare stare at his face. She looked away and tried to make conversation. "You're too thin. Eat more." No response, but he didn't stop eating either. That probably meant she could keep talking. Polly sensed this was a good chance to grow closer to him. Since they weren't in Paris, and he hadn't yet met the heroine, he hadn't descended into madness. Getting on his good side now couldn't hurt. She thought for a moment, then chose a topic that allowed her to monologue. "Do you know how to start a circus?" Still no response. She hadn't expected an answer and continued, "However you build it, it shouldn't be like the managers." He treated performers like disposable exhibits. Once the audience saw them once, they lost interest. That approach stunts performers' growth and becomes a burden on the circus. Erik didn't even lift his head, still eating. "Freakish appearances get old fast," she said. "If Emily were my performer, I wouldn't sell her or turn her into a specimen. That's a crime and unsustainable. I give her a sincere backstory to show the audience she's more than just a 4-legged girl. She's a real person." Erik finally looked up at her. Polly smiled slightly. "Maybe you think it's pointless, that her backstory won't change how she looks. People will still fear her, reject her, see her as a circus clown. But what if," she tilted her head, "people discovered that beneath her unusual appearance, she's a devout Christian, capable of loving and being loved? I'd write her a script tailored to her story, make her seem pitiful, tragic, deserving of sympathy. People would sympathize with her. Everyone has sympathy lying around. The rich pity the poor pity beggars, the able-bodied beggars pity disabled ones. Sympathy isn't just a virtue, it's a privilege. Fortunate people see the misfortunes of others and feel luckier. The able-bodied see the disabled and feel more whole. They'll pay generously for this experience. And most importantly, Emily was pregnant. Polly frowned. The manager was both cruel and stupid. He could have used that to build a stronger, more sympathetic narrative. But instead, he chose to make her miscarry and turned her fetus into a specimen. A voice spoke beside her. What story? Polly froze. That was the third time she had heard him speak. Maybe it was because he was sitting right next to her this time. His voice came through clearly. It was as if something cold and crisp slipped into her ear, soaking every nerve, creating a strange resonance in her brain. It was hard to describe, like a trance, like hypnosis, like a dream halfway to nightmare. Polly's heart pounded, her breath grew rapid, and her thoughts scattered. It was so beautiful it was terrifying. She shuddered and snapped out of it. Too scary. She had just lost herself in the sound of someone's voice. That was no human voice. It was more like a siren's call, an otherworldly lure that could lead to death. She had hoped he would speak more. After all, his voice in the original novel was said to be mesmerizing, and she had regretted missing it earlier due to nerves. She hadn't expected it to sound like this, evoking tales of curses and doom. Better, he kept quiet. It took a long while for Polly to find her own voice again. Of course, the goal is to exaggerate her pregnancy. In many religions, creating life is sacred. If she were truly a monster, why would God let her bear a child? No response. Polly continued. Where I come from, people will pay for a good story. Like the one where a rich heir loses everything gambling. Different people take different things from the same story. The wealthy take it as a warning and feel lucky they haven't gone broke. The poor feel comforted. It proves that even those born into privilege can lose everything through stupidity. Lucky gamblers scoff at him. Unlucky ones hope the story will convince them to quit. She lowered her voice. Emily's pregnancy means nothing by itself. She's human, she got pregnant, that's it. It's human complexity that gives it layers of meaning. Still no response. I wonder where Emily went, Polly murmured. And with that, her one-sided conversation ended. She yawned. Sleep was catching up to her. Erik was still eating. His appetite was astonishing. After finishing the hot pot, he ate the rabbit too, which made sense. With his energy output during a kill spree, he needed massive calorie intake just to function. Polly told him goodnight and stepped into the tent. She pulled the blanket over herself, ready to sleep, but then sat back up and said, "The blanket's big. If you're tired, feel free to sleep here too." She only said that so he wouldn't wake her in the middle of the night with a dagger to the face asking for permission. She didn't want to be startled awake and ruin a clean pair of pants. Erik didn't respond. Still uneasy, Polly repeated the invitation before lying down and closing her eyes. She had done everything she could. The rest was up to fate. In the middle of the night, something cold brushed her cheek. She was too sleepy to react at first. After a long moment, she pried open her eyes. The first thing she saw was a white mask, expressionless and blank, like a wax figure. Erik was half kneeling beside her, staring at her intently. In his hand was a dagger. Its icy blade was tracing along her cheek, up and down. Polly nearly died of shock on the spot. She had told him beforehand. Why was this happening again? She froze, heart pounding, blood thudding in her ears. She had no idea if he was finally going to kill her or just messing with her out of boredom. Probably the latter. She hadn't said anything wrong before bed. Everything she had said, she believed. She truly thought Emily was no different from anyone else, that it was people's eyes that cast her as the four-legged girl, but she hadn't spoken casually. Every word she said was calculated, watching Erik's reactions for signs of anger, surprise, agreement, or disdain. She had used every bit of her acting skill to deliver one message. You don't need others' sympathy. It's just another form of privilege. If he had been offended, he would have killed her the moment she said it. There was no need to wait until she fell asleep, then judge her in her sleep with a knife. So, what did he want? Polly's mind raced. Her heart was about to burst. Adrenaline surged through her veins. Was he testing her reaction? Evaluating whether she was a worthy partner? A resilient prey? Or was he asking for something? Suddenly, realization struck her. She reached out and hugged him, burying her face in his chest. Just as she suspected, the moment she embraced him, he put the knife away. Polly broke into a cold sweat. Every time she had hugged him before, it was in response to danger, whenever he brought the blade to her throat. This may have given him the wrong idea, that if he wanted affection, he had to threaten her first. That was a habit she had to break. He needed the right reward mechanism. So she hugged him tighter, clinging to him like a child with a favorite stuffed animal. Erik lay down with her in his arms. Not only had he developed a faulty reward mechanism, so had she. She'd come to associate his arms with safety. Twisted, maybe, but necessary. She needed the sense of security he provided. What did he need? She didn't know. Polly wanted to figure it out. But the tight space, the glow of fire outside the tent, and the exhaustion after fear, all wrapped around her like a suffocating net. Erik's body radiated heat. Maybe it was from exertion or all the high-calorie food, but he was like a high-powered engine, constantly emitting warmth. Hot, safe, an illusion. She reminded herself, even if he was warm, he was still a warm-blooded killing machine. But she was too tired to think anymore. Polly closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, and she drifted off to sleep. Polly was awakened by Erik. She opened her eyes groggily, thinking he wanted a hug again, so she wrapped her arms around his waist and buried her face in his chest, ready to go back to sleep. He paused briefly, then grabbed her arm and forcefully pulled her away. It was the first time he had ever rejected her hug. Polly snapped, fully awake. She had no idea how long they had slept. Dawn was breaking. A light mist hung in the air. It must have rained a little during the night. Moss, rotting leaves, and mud were soaked, their colors blending into a gloomy greenish mess. Just the sight of the mud made Polly's head ache. Even after all this time, she still hadn't adapted to the wilderness. No bed, no water. The mud could swallow her pant legs or soak through her shoes at any moment. Even if she lived like this for another 10 years, she doubted she'd ever get used to it. As she hesitated, Erik had already left the tent. Polly put on her shoes and was about to go look for him when she suddenly heard hooves and the creaking of wagon wheels outside. No wonder Erik had pulled away and left early. He didn't like being seen by strangers. He rarely appeared in front of people. As a predator, he had no need to be seen. Shadows were better suited for striking. The wagon seemed to stop right in front of the tent. A door opened, someone jumped down from the carriage, and footsteps approached her tent. Polly reacted quickly. She dashed to the side of the tent, only revealing her profile, one hand hidden behind her back, pretending she had a gun. "Who's there?" A cheerful voice responded. "Thank God you're here. I thought that freak had killed you." He sounded like he knew her, speaking with a familiarity she didn't recognize. Polly's heart tensed. From his tone, it was clear he knew about Erik, and everything that had happened at the circus. She had assumed that with the manager dead, the circus was over, and she had finally escaped that twisted place. But clearly, the circus's shadow still loomed over her. Someone had followed them, quietly, persistently, all the way here. Polly replied coolly, "I don't know you, but I know you." The man took off his hat and bowed exaggeratedly, almost comically polite. "You're Polly Clement from the circus, aren't you?" "What if I said I wasn't?" He chuckled. "Then I'd say you're a liar, child. Do you know Emily?" Polly's tone sharpened. "She's not with me. I know." "She's with me," the man said. "To show my goodwill, Miss Clement, let me introduce myself. I'm Tricky Terry, a friendly and honest intermediary. I don't use knives or guns. You can come out and talk to me without worry." Polly had no idea what kind of game he was playing, but after a brief thought, she slowly stepped outside. "It's fine," she told herself. "Erik is watching from the shadows." She didn't realize how unhealthy this kind of dependency had become. The moment she saw Tricky's face, her whole body stiffened. She recognized this tall, thin man. He'd stood beside Emily at the party, chatting and laughing with the manager. Emily's brother. She had guessed right. He wasn't really Emily's brother. He called himself a middleman, but for what exactly? And why had he followed them here? Polly had no answers, and didn't dare think too far ahead. "I don't think I'm worth being tracked down by a middleman," she said flatly. "You're cautious." "That's good." Tricky pulled a match and a cigarette from his pocket. "The world's a dangerous place. Cops don't care, and Pinkerton only works for the rich. Folks like us, no one even notices when we die." Polly said coldly, "You mean no one would care if I died here?" "God forbid." Tricky raised a hand solemnly, cigarette dangling from his lips. "I meant those folks in the woods. Your former employer, Mr. Dawes?" Dawes. That was the manager's surname. The circus was named after him. Polly asked, "What does it matter to me whether Mr. Dawes is alive or dead?" Such indifference. Tricky sighed, shaking his head. But understandable. He wasn't a good man, full of lies and cruelty. I'll be honest, I'm not Emily's brother. Polly raised her eyebrows in mock surprise. Dawes sent her with me in hopes that she'd serve science. You know. She has 4 legs. Many scientists are curious if she has 2 sets of organs, and if so, how pregnancy works for her. Tricky continued, I was hired to persuade her to accept euthanasia and donate her body to those curious scientists. Polly finally understood what it meant to twist language. Kidnapping and profiteering were being spun as noble service to science. She sneered, So you're here to convince me to serve science too? Tricky smiled. Darling, no. No one but Emily needs to do that. He exhaled a plume of smoke, narrowing his eyes. I'm here to recruit your companion, Erik. At last, he got to the point. Polly's heart skipped. She quickly adapted, replying in a tone tinged with jealousy. Erik? What's so special about him? He's just a fast thief. If you'd seen what he did to the manager, you wouldn't say that. Polly answered confidently, I didn't see it. My horse spooked. That was the truth. Tricky's smile faded. His initial friendliness vanished. Enough small talk, kid. His tone turned sharp. Tell me where Erik is and I'll make you rich. You'll never worry about money again. You don't want to spend your life wallowing in mud, do you? He looked at her like she was a fool sitting on treasure, too dumb to use it. But he didn't know that handing over the treasure would mean her death. Besides, if Erik was so powerful that everyone wanted him, why would she give him up? Still, Polly glanced at Tricky's carriage. It was clearly expensive. Lacquered exterior, silk curtains, painted panels, and well-maintained wheels. Tricky was wealthy, and he'd provoked Erik. Erik probably hadn't gone far. He might be listening right now. Polly had a sudden, wicked thought. Could she persuade Erik to rob Tricky? Then she wouldn't have to wallow in mud the rest of her life. Tricky noticed her silence and realized he'd been too aggressive. He switched back to a warm, respectful tone. I mean no harm. I just want to do business with him. You've never seen magic like his. He conjured fire from thin air. It was like real sorcery. The last magician who shocked me like that was Robert Houdin. The original novel also compared Erik's magical talent to Robert Houdin, widely known as the father of modern magic. If not for him, magic might have remained mere street trickery instead of refined performance art. Polly had never seen Erik perform magic. Her curiosity piqued. Was he really that amazing? She thought for a moment, then decided to play the role of a petty, envious girl to the end. What's the big deal? There was an Indian guy in the circus who could breathe fire. That's not the same, Tricky exclaimed, nearly jumping up. Any kid can do that with a torch and a mouthful of alcohol. He cut himself off, visibly holding back his anger. Then he took a deep breath and handed her a card. Here's my calling card, with my address. Next week, I'm hosting a grand banquet. All the high society elites will be there. If you hear anything about Erik, let me know before then. Or that day works too. I promise you'll be well rewarded. His card carried a faint, pleasant fragrance, his cologne. Polly couldn't resist sniffing it. Say what you will about the man, he had solved her biggest immediate problem. No money, no connections. It was like someone offering her a pillow just when she was falling asleep. If she wanted to make it in this era, the manager's wallet wasn't enough. Going back to the circus camp to scavenge wasn't an option either. Not everyone had joined the manhunt. Some must have stayed behind. If she returned now, they'd either be looking for the manager or looting his belongings. If she could get Erik to let her attend Tricky's banquet, she might finally meet new people, maybe even land some investors for her future circus. Mainly, she just wanted to talk to someone. She missed socializing. Polly wasn't an extrovert. She was actually a bit introverted. Besides mandatory events, she usually stayed home playing games. Hiking had been her friend's idea. She'd stuffed 2 3-pound hot pot cans into her backpack and got teased endlessly for it. Since transmigrating, she hadn't dared make eye contact, speak, or express her feelings. It was terrifying, like being isolated from the entire world. She had hugged a man who might kill her at any moment, just for a shred of comfort. Erik was dangerous. Their relationship wasn't friendship. It was predator and prey. And still, it was better than being cold and alone. She craved human connection. Any kind. Even just the scent of another person. Like Erik, she wanted a hug. Any hug. Just to remind her she was still alive. By the time she snapped out of her thoughts, Tricky had already climbed back into his carriage and left. Footsteps behind her signaled Erik's return. His tall shadow loomed over her. He stood behind her and silently plucked the card from her fingers. For some reason, he lowered his head slightly. The nose of his mask hovered over the card, almost like he was smelling it. Why? Because she had sniffed it too? Polly was confused. She shook off the thought and said brightly, "I want to go to that banquet." Erik glanced at her, neither agreeing nor objecting. "I really want to start a circus," she explained. Tricky was close with the manager. "Maybe some of the guests at the party will be interested in investing. If I'm lucky, I might secure funding." Erik studied her expressionlessly, cards still in hand. By now, Polly had learned to read his cues. She met his eyes and knew it was time for a hug. "You don't have to worry," she said as she wrapped her arms around his waist. "I won't trade you for anything." Silently, she added, "But if you could help me rob Tricky, that'd be even better." She didn't really expect that. She wasn't delusional enough to think she could command Erik. He gave nothing away, but after the hug, he handed the card back to her. Polly breathed a sigh of relief. He believed her. Crisis averted. That thought had barely formed when the card burst into flames in her hand. The fire appeared out of nowhere. The card had no oil, no alcohol, nothing flammable, yet it burned instantly. Startled, Polly dropped it into the mud, but it kept burning, the flames unnaturally bright until it turned to ash. Her heart pounded wildly. She stood frozen. She knew magic was just sleight of hand, an art form, a psychological trick. Magicians manipulate attention and perception to mislead the audience's senses. But witnessing it firsthand like this, it was overwhelming. If she had internet, she'd be scouring videos for how the trick was done. Still stunned, Polly asked, "So, can I still go to the banquet?" To her surprise, Erik nodded. Polly was stunned and confused. If he agreed, then why burn the card? Suddenly, a strange thought crept into her mind. Was this his way of responding to what she'd told Tricky earlier? That smug line, "What's the big deal?" There was an Indian guy who could breathe fire. Polly wasn't worried about losing Tricky's business card. This wasn't the modern world, where people didn't care about each other. If Tricky was really throwing a banquet, all she needed to do was ask around once she reached the city, and someone would happily spill all the details. Breakfast that morning was a rabbit Erik had hunted. Right in front of her, he skinned the rabbit, slitting open its belly with a dagger, gripping the incision with both hands, and ripping the fur right off in one smooth motion. Polly was stunned. A part of her even wanted to ask if he could catch another rabbit so she could try skinning it too. But she didn't dare. After breakfast, Erik doused the fire with water, kicked some dirt over the embers, and then firmly stomped it all down with his boots. By the time he was done, there were almost no traces left of the fire. Polly had to admit, gaining Erik's loyalty was the smartest thing she had done since arriving in this world. He seemed to have extensive survival skills. His movements were calm and swift. He packed up the tent, folded it with a wool blanket, strapped it to the back of the saddle, and secured the hiking backpack with thick leather straps. In the modern world, horses were considered a luxury of luxuries. Most people, even if they had ridden before, did so under the supervision of a trained handler. Ordinary folks had no idea how to safely approach a horse or how to adjust a saddle without spooking one. Despite how dangerous Erik was, Polly couldn't deny, without him, she would have died under the manager's gun or been trampled by Caesar. She hadn't forgotten that Caesar, when agitated, had once bitten off a stable hand's ear. Erik had saved her. She couldn't help but say to him, "Thank you." When traveling with others, saying thank you was always a good idea. Erik acted as if he didn't hear her. He mounted the horse and pulled the reins. Polly had just opened her mouth to say, "I can get on by myself," when he leaned down, grabbed her sides just like last time, and hoisted her up. She swallowed the words. She remembered that Tricky had mentioned staying at a hotel in New Orleans, but she had no idea how far away they were. They rode in silence. Polly stared at the scenery, her mind louder than it had ever been. In truth, she had never planned to start a circus. She only said that to win Erik over, saying she wanted to write scripts for freak performers so the public could see them as real people, also a tactic to win his trust. He rarely spoke, his thoughts were hard to read, his actions unpredictable. So, she had tried to use people with similar experiences to reach his heart. Only then could she improve her odds of survival. She hadn't expected Tricky to find them. And now, with access to both money and resources for a circus, if she didn't follow through, it would raise suspicion. She had no choice but to go along with the plan. The swamp offered no beauty, just tall, grim, bald cypress trees with moss-covered branches. Pale green lichens dangled down, swaying in the wind. Eventually, she dozed off. When she woke, it was dark. They had left the swamp behind and entered an area with a few shabby farmhouses. Pigs, cows, and sheep milled about in fenced yards. The roads were muddy and slick, and horse manure littered every few steps. As they neared the city, the fog thickened into a filthy brown-yellow haze. Gas street lamps had already been lit, but the fog was so dense the light couldn't penetrate. It felt swallowed whole. Polly frowned and covered her nose with her arm. She thought the air here was worse than modern highways, harsh and acrid. Despite the heavy fog, Erik navigated effortlessly. He had clearly been to New Orleans before, and soon found the hotel. As he leaned forward to toss the reins onto the hitching post, Polly stopped him, afraid he wouldn't catch her movement. She practically hugged his waist. "Wait, do you know where there's a clothing store?" Erik paused for a moment, then picked up the reins again and gently pulled the horse toward another direction. Polly exhaled in relief. After a night of travel, Erik smelled awful. A strange mix of sweat, blood, and swamp rot. If he walked into a hotel like that, every eye would be on him. The image alone gave Polly the chills. Erik hated being looked at. Hated it even more than being seen by just one person. If something like that happened, she was sure he'd snap, and she didn't want to imagine the consequences. The clothing store was just about to close. Polly had to beg the owner to let them in. For some reason, the shopkeeper didn't even blink at Erik's mask. He took a tape measure from around his neck and started taking measurements. 6'2", the shopkeeper muttered. "You're lucky. Normally we don't carry clothes that big, but a client named Terry ordered outfits for his freaks and a few extras were made. They're exactly your size." Polly thanked him right away. The shopkeeper seemed to assume she was Erik's manager and began chatting with her. "You folks here for the spectacle show? Lots of people pouring into town for it." No, Polly said quickly. "We're siblings. He's my younger brother. Just got back from hunting in the swamp." As she spoke, she handed Erik a shirt and pants and motioned for him to change in the fitting room. The shopkeeper measured Polly next and commented, "You two are wild. One's freakishly tall, the other short as a stump. What, did he steal all your milk in the womb?" Polly nearly choked on her own spit. Thankfully, Erik didn't hear it. He was still in the fitting room. Mother, women, intimacy, all things Erik couldn't tolerate being joked about. He wouldn't allow anyone to mock them. Suddenly, Polly had a strange thought. What if she treated him the way a mother would? Would that help her survive longer? She had to flip the predator and prey dynamic. Maybe this was a breakthrough. She turned and asked the shopkeeper, "Do you have any dresses?" "My size. Dresses." In the end, Polly bought several floral dresses, a few blouses and trousers, a wide-brimmed hat, a coarse woolen cap, and a black cloak. Erik had no objections to her choices. He only bought himself a pair of gloves. Black leather gloves. As he slowly put them on, long fingers stretching the leather tight over each knuckle, Polly suddenly recalled a scene from a movie. The same cold, ruthless hunter aura. Maybe it was fear, but her legs felt weak. Polly helped him put on the black cloak and wide-brimmed hat, then they returned to the hotel. Outside, a few gentlemen were smoking. They glanced at them casually when they dismounted, then went back to chatting. Buying new clothes had definitely been the right call. Polly didn't even want to imagine how those men would have looked at them if they had arrived in their filthy travel, worn outfits, and how Erik would have reacted under their gaze. She had narrowly avoided disaster. If this were a video game, she would have just unlocked an achievement. Polly wiped the cold sweat from her forehead and approached the hotel porter to rent a room. She intended to get 2 rooms, but considering Erik's volatility, she decided it was safer for them to stay together. The hotel had a shared bath. The last guest had just finished, and the water was still hot. The porter offered a discount if they didn't mind reused water. Polly politely declined and requested 2 fresh tubs of hot water. Their room was on the 3rd floor. At the staircase, a boy was handing out cards. He looked about 12 or 13, dressed in an adult suit, hair slicked down with oil. "Gentlemen, next week, a once-in-a-lifetime spectacle will take place, represented by the great curator, Tricky Terry." Polly took the card, It was cruder than the last one Tricky gave her. No address, just ornate patterns on the edge and a delicate line of script beneath his name. Curator of Curiosities. Polly slipped it into her pocket and thanked the boy before heading up. After leading them to their room, the porter informed them that the bathhouse was next door. The water was still being heated, and someone would notify them when it was ready. Polly thanked him again. Once the door was shut, she suddenly realized she had no idea if Erik even wanted to bathe. Wild animals didn't like bathing. Would he refuse? She turned to ask him but didn't get the chance. He pinned her to the floor. The thick wool carpet barely cushioned the impact. Polly nearly cried out from the pain. "You," she gasped. "What's wrong now?" Erik loomed over her, silent. His eyes behind the mask burned down at her, their weight like a physical force dragging across her throat. She was clearly in pain and terrified. Sweat trickled down her neck, hot and slick, like water running over a live coal, making his palm itch. And yet, even at her most frightened, she didn't resist his touch. He didn't like that feeling. It made him uneasy. She seemed obsessed with touching him and letting him touch her. No one had ever treated him like that. Not even his mother. Most of his life, the only things he touched were corpses. Back in the Mazandaran palace, he was ordered to perform executions for the king, torturing criminals in the dungeon, killing them in the arena with a rope. He had touched every kind of dead body. Warm, cold, stiff, bloody, unblinking. When they were alive, they recoiled from his touch. But once dead, they were docile, like livestock, letting him drag them wherever. He had always been calm and rational, never dreaming of touching the living. But lately, he had touched too much. She kept hugging him, kissing his mask, sleeping in his arms, treating him like a harmless, oversized stuffed animal. Now she had gone further, dressing him in new clothes, bringing him to a luxury hotel, and trying to make him take a bath. What did she see him as? A pet? He had never felt this uncomfortable. Blood pounded in his temples, his instincts clawed for release. He knew she meant no harm. She was just trying to survive and being kind where she could. But every time she looked at him, hugged him, or kissed his mask, it was like an invisible whip lashing him. His scalp tingled, hair stood on end, veins bulged in his neck. A primal self-defense screamed at him, "Kill her now, or something worse would happen." Polly had no idea what had triggered him. It was like watching the protagonist of a horror movie suddenly snap. She could barely breathe. Trembling, she reached up and hugged his neck, kissing the mask again. But to her horror, it didn't work. He looked down at her, unmoved, blank. She cursed in her mind. Had he built up immunity to it? Fear pressed on her chest like cold lead. Maybe because she was so tense, she could hear static ringing in her ears. That's when she noticed a pulsing vein on his neck, pale skin slick with sweat, the vein standing out like a furious, twitching snake. Without thinking, Polly kissed it. It was the first time she kissed his bare skin. He jolted like he'd been stung, instantly letting her go. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Eyes shut, drenched in sweat, heart pounding so hard her throat hurt. Another lucky guess. She was a genius. Though she was developing a bizarre reflex, kiss him when threatened. The only silver lining? He seemed to have developed a matching reflex. Whenever she kissed him, he stopped trying to kill her. Polly didn't know which reflex was more deranged, nor could she say who had the upper hand anymore. Who was taming whom? At long last, Polly got to take a hot bath. The hotel's bathhouse was bigger than she expected, and the tub was filled with perfume-scented water, exuding a strong lavender fragrance. A full set of bathing supplies sat nearby: soap, hair oil, sponge, towels, face cloths, combs, cold cream, and cologne. Polly scrubbed herself for over an hour with the sponge and soap before finally stepping out. It was the first time since transmigrating that she felt like her pores had truly opened. Her whole body felt 3 pounds lighter. As she towel-dried her damp hair, she was already pondering how she might get Erik to take a bath as well. But when she returned to the room, she found he had vanished. She was used to his sudden appearances and disappearances by now, so she didn't think much of it. Just hoped he wouldn't drag anyone back in the middle of the night again. Speaking of which, she had finally seen what this body looked like. It resembled her modern self almost exactly. Her father was French, and she had inherited his high nose bridge, deep-set eyes, fair skin, and a few faint freckles on the bridge of her nose. The only difference was that her modern self had black hair. whereas this body had red hair. To be precise, it was strawberry blonde, but under certain lighting, it appeared like a vivid, showy red. Polly now understood why this body had been dressed as a boy. Red-haired individuals, especially red-haired women, had long been subject to discrimination. In one of Chekhov's stories, he even wrote, "Red-haired women are cunning, deceitful, malicious, and treacherous." Though the line was satirical, it still reflected the bias that existed back then. Polly never learned why the original owner's mother dressed her as a boy, but she chose to believe it was a form of protection, not a case of favoring sons over daughters. The dresses she had bought earlier were all laid out on the bed. She casually picked up a printed floral dress and changed into it. Her hair was still short, not even reaching her ears, but once she put on the dress, it didn't look out of place at all. In fact, it gave her a sharp, wild charm. She put on the coarse woolen bonnet, tied the strap under her chin, and felt that if she walked out now, no one would guess she was the Mr. Clement staying in this hotel. In this era, it wasn't unheard of for women to wear men's clothing. That was typically limited to performers in theaters or circuses, not respectable ladies. True ladies never wore trousers. To them, pants only existed underneath skirts, as absolute privacy and taboo. Wearing pants in public was akin to exposing one's thighs, something only can dancers would do. That was part of the reason audiences loved watching cross-dressing performers. A woman on stage might think herself dignified, dressed like a gentleman, but to the male audience, she was already half naked. What a pity Erik wasn't here. She would have loved to test his reaction to her in a dress. So far, he only knew she was a girl. He hadn't yet seen her dressed like one. Maybe her kisses didn't affect him much, simply because she wasn't in women's clothing? Polly regretted deleting the Phantom of the Opera novel after finishing it, rather than saving it offline. If she had it now, she could go over the details again, take notes, maybe even write a strategy guide, just in case she ever got something wrong and ended up dead because of it. Actually, who said she needed the original text to write a guide? Polly had no idea how long she'd be stuck in this world. Right now, she still remembered most of the plot details. But what about a year from now? Or 2, 5, 10? Who knew if her memory would hold out that long? With that thought, she immediately pulled open the drawer of the hotel writing desk, found a blank notebook, and started writing with a fountain pen. She wasn't worried about Erik reading it. Even if he was smart and spoke multiple languages, there was no way he could read simplified Chinese. The development of simplified characters was a long process. While the basics might exist, it would still take 100 years for them to evolve into their modern forms. Unless Erik found another Chinese person to translate every character for him, there was zero chance he could decipher it on his own. Polly first jotted down a summary of the original novel's plot, then marked the differences between the novel, the musical, and the horror adaptation. Finally, she wrote a warning to herself. If he tries to kill you, the best way to diffuse the danger is through kissing, hugging, or any kind of physical contact. She paused for a moment and continued. 1. It's now the second half of October, 1888. So far, you haven't seen his face. But no matter what he looks like, do not be afraid. Do not show shock, disgust, or fear. Otherwise, very terrible things will happen. 2. Always show sympathy for what he's been through. He's extremely dangerous and rarely speaks. Learn to sympathize indirectly. Show empathy for people with similar experiences. 3. This isn't the original novel, nor the musical version. His level of danger and vigilance is off the charts. He may do extremely extreme things. Even though you've been very cautious so far, you've still almost died multiple times. After she finished writing, Polly read through the notebook from the beginning, confirmed there was nothing else to add, and tucked it into her hiking backpack. The wall clock in the room showed it was 9 p.m., and Erik still hadn't returned. Her heart thudded heavily. What if he never came back? Even now, she still didn't understand what had happened earlier. He had pinned her to the ground without warning, gripped her throat, and closed in on her with those cold, dark eye holes in his mask, as if he were about to carve her apart. Then she kissed his neck, and he disappeared without a word. Every move he made defied logic. Polly was more convinced than ever that writing down survival strategies had been the right call. Otherwise, with time, she might actually forget how to deal with him. She placed the first aid kit beside her pillow, mentally preparing for the possibility that Erik might drag someone back in the middle of the night. But the night passed uneventfully. Still no sign of him. She didn't know whether that was a good thing or bad. Was the nightmare finally over? Was she free from her daily life or death struggle? When he was around, her nerves were constantly on edge, terrified he would suddenly turn violent. Now he was gone, but her heart had climbed into her throat. Maybe it was because this world belonged to Erik. Here, he was the undisputed predator. Everyone else was prey, weak, naive, oblivious. Losing track of the predator wasn't exactly good news for the prey. 2 more days passed, and Erik still didn't return. Polly tried to comfort herself. At least now she didn't have to wake in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps, or worry about him pinning her down with a knife to her throat. She was completely safe, at least for now. In these 3 days, she hadn't been idle. She had asked around and found out the location of Tricky's banquet. It was right here, at this hotel. Calling it a banquet was generous. It was more like a supernatural exhibition. Tricky had rented the entire 5th floor to display his paranormal wonders. Mediums, deformities, bizarre specimens, and uncanny photographs. Just like the strange items she had once seen in the manager's wooden chest. Only now, on a much larger scale, with a far more extensive collection. Polly needed something, anything, to distract herself, so she decided to check it out. After all, it was just upstairs. She didn't go in disguise. She was afraid Tricky might recognize her if she dressed as a man and start pestering her about Erik's whereabouts. So she put on a dress, a woman's hat, and a black veil. Thankfully, the wig industry was already quite advanced. Even if a breeze blew her hat off, no one would see her wild short hair. The exhibition officially opened at 3 p.m., but by 2:30, Tricky was already greeting guests at the entrance. He was dressed to the nines, smiling warmly. "Please come in, ladies and gentlemen. The exhibition is open early. Here's a brochure. It's on the 5th floor. The banquet begins at 5:30 in the rooftop garden." Polly took a brochure and stepped into a corner to read it. At Tricky Terry's Exhibition of Wonders, you will see renowned mediums, gifted with the ability to communicate with spirits. Deformed individuals presenting tragic and unforgettable destinies. Freak specimens, rare and exotic creatures from around the globe. Exorcism tools, handcrafted based on ancient scriptures, ideal for purification rituals. Paranormal photographs, real ghost images that may harm your mental or physical well-being. Please view with staff assistance. Interested buyers may inquire with staff for any item above. Additional services available for VIP guests include seances, exorcisms, and spirit conjuring. Please consult Mr. Tricky Terry for details. Before transmigrating, Polly had never believed in ghosts. But after seeing Erik's superhuman abilities, she suddenly wasn't so sure anymore. She looked at the section for mediums in the brochure, and a bold thought crossed her mind. Could this medium know how to get her home? Polly followed the map to the marked area. To her surprise, the renowned medium was a man. He was young and handsome, dressed in a black suit, hands folded over his knees. When he saw her approach, he smiled and stood. "Miss," he said with a smile, "don't speak just yet. Let me guess, you've been troubled lately, haven't you?" Polly frowned slightly. This wasn't what she came for, just another cold read. "You say that to everyone?" "Of course not," he said, shaking his head. "I heard it from your spirit. It told me you've been upset lately." "Shh." He looked into her eyes and held up a finger. "Don't speak. Let me guess again. You don't belong here, do you?" Polly's heart skipped a beat. She fought to stay composed. "What makes you say that?" "Your spirit told me," he replied. "Let's talk while we walk." "Oh, forgive me. I'm Lawrence Boyd." "Mr. Boyd?" She nodded politely. "Spirits are very sensitive," Boyd explained. "Only gentle, empathetic people can communicate with them. That's why most mediums are women, though there are a few exceptions, like myself." He smiled kindly. "They're not as scary as people think. Quite the opposite. They're soft and fragile, like butter." Polly nodded, pretending to listen attentively. Boyd took her to see some of his paranormal photographs. At first glance, they looked like ordinary black and white portraits, but on closer inspection, they sent chills down the spine. One showed a woman seated in a photo studio, with a sticky, white blurred ghost wrapping itself around her neck. Her face had been blacked out with ink, probably to protect her privacy. "She was a client of mine," Boyd said. "The ghost was her dead lover. He couldn't let her go and kept visiting. But when ghosts linger too close to the living, they bring devastating misfortune." He then looked directly at Polly's neck. "Just like you. Ghosts leave brutal marks on those they touch. You must have been truly desperate to seek me out." "Oh no." Polly cursed herself. She had forgotten to wear a scarf. Boyd reached toward her neck, his hand hovering just an inch from her skin, then suddenly pulled back. "Sorry," he said softly. "I smelled a ghost's presence on you. Your spirit is frightened. It's even trying to seek protection from me. That's rare. Spirits never ask outsiders for help unless they're terrified." "Well," Polly said, trying to stay vague, "I'm not too concerned about that. It's just, I know someone from a faraway place. He might need a special ritual to go back. Do you know anyone who could help?" Boyd shook his head. "But I'll keep an eye out," he said, offering her a card. His gaze lingered. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to contact me. I live here at the hotel." Maybe it was just her imagination, but as Boyd spoke, Polly suddenly broke out in goosebumps, as if something had locked onto her. She felt like she was being watched. Or not something. Someone, or maybe not even someone. Just a presence. A presence that was sharp, cold, ominous. Exactly like the ghosts Boyd had described. Polly felt chilled to the bone. It must be the after effects of Erik. It would pass. She hoped. Polly had never imagined she'd one day place her hopes in ghosts and spirits. Yet she began meeting with Boyd frequently, hoping to learn more about mediums through him. To be fair, Boyd seemed like a decent person. He was gentle, courteous, charming, with long pale fingers and a light, elegant cologne. Even if he weren't a medium, she would have still enjoyed his company. Boyd told her that mediums were always extremely cautious and rarely accepted visitors. "You have to understand," he said kindly. "Even now, some places still hold on to the tradition of burning witches. Every medium, especially female ones, is a precious asset of the spirit world. We must protect them. But don't worry," he added gently. "When the time is right, I'll definitely introduce you to them, so your friend can find a way home." Polly didn't know if she was just grasping at straws. She understood that much of what Boyd said was more performance than psychic revelation. People who seek out mediums are often desperate, and desperate people are often scared, especially when they have bruises on their neck, like the ones Erik had left on her. With her neck bruised and aching, of course she seemed scared. That's probably why Boyd had said, "Your spirit is frightened," with such certainty. What truly caught her attention was his line, "Let me guess, you don't belong here." But now that she thought about it, with her accent, tone, mannerisms, clothing, and walk all so out of place among these 19th century ladies, it wasn't a hard conclusion to draw. After mulling it over, Polly decided it was better to believe than not. That day, she had lunch with Boyd and went to the theater for a show. She hadn't really wanted to go, reminded of the plot in Phantom of the Opera. Boyd, thinking she was reluctant about opera, smiled and explained, "This is a small theater. They don't perform operas. The audience here comes for magic, acrobatics, and singing stars." Polly thought about it and agreed. Maybe it was time she returned to her roots. If she wanted to start a circus, observing local performance styles wouldn't be a bad idea. Boyd was a regular at the theater. He led her straight to a plush crimson box seat. He pulled out a pair of opera glasses and handed them to her. "Here. You'll see more clearly." The glasses were still warm from his touch, which made her uneasy. Or maybe it was just her imagination, but when she took them, his thumb seemed to brush the back of her gloved hand deliberately. Polly frowned slightly. The theater was stiflingly hot. With so many people's breath trapped in one space, the air was thick and suffocating. She hadn't been sitting 10 minutes before sweat started running down her back. Sticky moisture slid along her neck like crawling insects. Maybe it was because of their spot in the box, but she kept feeling a warm breeze brush against the nape of her neck, like someone breathing right behind her. Then Boyd suddenly spoke. "This female singer must be crazy, cutting her hair that short like a man." Polly was just trying to survive the heat and hadn't heard him. "Hair is part of the soul," he said softly. "When I treat my female clients, I always advise them to protect their hair. A woman's hair is an extension of her spirit. Cutting it is like cutting your soul. It invites spirits to invade." Polly finally realized he was full of nonsense. Hair? Part of the soul? Then by that logic, all men are spiritually disabled, she shot back. Boyd didn't respond. After a pause, he stood up, walked behind her, and placed his hands on her shoulders. Polly grew more and more uncomfortable and struggled. "You don't move," he murmured, leaning in to whisper in her ear. "I won't hurt you. I just didn't expect that after all this time, you still don't believe I can see spirits. Let me prove it to you." He reached out and gently caressed the side of her neck. Feel it? Your spirit is moving with my fingers. It's scared, afraid someone will grab your neck again and leave another terrible bruise. But don't worry, I'll heal it. My blood is magnetic. As long as we're in the same room, open, honest, everything will be healed. Polly's face twitched. She abruptly stood up. This was pathetic. As a modern woman, how had she been duped by a con artist like this for so long? She'd guessed right. Boyd was just a smooth-talking scammer aiming for sex. Who knew how many young ladies had fallen for this act? His gentle touch, whispered nonsense. It probably made them shiver and mistake the sensation for spirit movement. Boyd looked at her in surprise. What's wrong, Miss Clement? Polly wanted to explode, but for the past few days, she had been out and about with Boyd. He knew she lived at the same hotel and had seen the room number on her key. She had been way too careless. Just because he looked like a gentleman, she assumed he was a good person. If this were modern times, she'd have kicked him where it hurt. But this was 19th century America, New Orleans. Police were sparse. Investigations ineffective. Boyd was connected to Tricky Terry, the man who had bought Emily from the manager, euthanized her, and sold her body to scientists. Polly had met Tricky right after escaping the circus, thinking it was all over. She'd completely forgotten Tricky was just as dangerous as the manager. Her palms were slick with cold sweat, a chill running up from her toes. Boyd and Tricky were two of a kind. He was fully capable of doing something just as extreme. She was at a disadvantage and needed to stay calm to keep him steady. She'd get away, then she'd deal with it. Swallowing hard, Polly took a step back and forced a smile. It's too stuffy in here. I can't breathe. Let's see another show next time. Boyd raised an eyebrow. He knew she was scared. But he was used to seeing this expression on women. He didn't care. As an experienced predator, he knew only when the prey let down their guard was it time to strike. Polly was beautiful. Her hands were a bit rough, but her demeanor and speech didn't match those of a poor girl. He didn't mind waiting a little longer. No problem, Boyd said gently, lifting the brim of his hat with 2 fingers. When you're ready to heal your soul, come find me. I'll be waiting. Polly said nothing, removed her coat, and left quickly. Boyd sat back down in his velvet seat, crossed his legs, and sipped gin. He picked up the opera glasses and focused on the show, never noticing that the closed door behind him had silently cracked open. Back at the hotel, Polly asked the staff to prepare hot water, then went upstairs, removed her wig, and stripped off the heavy dress. Women's clothing was too dangerous. She'd go back to dressing as a man. And it was way too hot. That theater was tiny, the box even smaller. 2 people in there felt like 3 were breathing. Wait, a shiver ran down her spine. Was there really a third person? Only one person could have pulled that off, Erik. But he hadn't appeared in days. Why would he be in that box? Just then, a knock came at her door. A servant informed her the bath was ready. Polly thought for a moment, then cut a few strands of hair from the wig and laid them at the bottom of her door. That way, she'd know if anyone entered her room. She instructed the staff not to clean the room and not to let anyone in, then went to bathe. When she returned, she crouched down and checked the door. The hairs hadn't moved. Maybe she was just being paranoid? She didn't sleep well that night. If Erik had been in that theater box, there was a good chance he'd sneak into her room. She slipped a pair of scissors under her pillow. All night, she gripped the handle tightly. The next morning, she got up and checked the door hairs again. Still untouched. After what happened with Boyd, Polly couldn't let her guard down again. She kept using the hair trick at the door. Just in case she ever forgot how she placed it, she pulled out her backup phone, booted it up, switched to battery saver, and took a photo. Day after day passed. On the 4th day, something finally changed. The hair had been disturbed only slightly. Whoever entered had clearly noticed the trap and tried to put the hairs back as they were. But they didn't know Polly had a phone and had photographed every single hair strand. She didn't know who had come into her room, Erik, or someone from Tricky's side. But after some thought, she realized the question didn't matter. Both of them were dangerous. Either one could kill her. Still, deep down, a voice whispered, "It does matter." Boyd hadn't filled the emptiness she felt after transmigrating. But Erik could. He made her heart race, her breathing quicken, adrenaline surge. He made her sharp, alert. He made her feel her heartbeat, reminded her she was truly alive. Boyd had made her cautious too, but the feeling wasn't the same. Why? She didn't know. She didn't know what to do now either. Pretend nothing happened? Or leave immediately? If she ran, would it provoke them and make things worse? On the 5th day, the hares vanished. Whoever it was had realized she'd figured them out and stopped pretending. The discovery chilled Polly to the bone. She went straight to the docks and asked several captains about upcoming voyages, hoping one might take her along. Apparently, that angered the intruder. On the 6th day, she returned to her room to find the phonograph playing, with a scratched record spinning slowly. The raspy song playing was the same one she and Boyd had heard at the theater. Polly felt her scalp tingle, her chest tighten, her heart pounded as if about to explode. She fought the panic and turned to open the door. Locked. Whoever it was wasn't playing games anymore. They were making their move. Polly rushed to the window. Also locked. She took a deep breath and reached for something to smash it. That's when a dark object dropped from above, straight toward her. She froze in place, paralyzed by fear. It dangled in front of her, swaying. Boyd's finger. She recognized it immediately. She knew those hands well. The finger still wore his ring, engraved with his initials, LB. It wasn't tricky. It was Erik. He had broken into her room. She didn't relax. Her heart beat faster. Erik had become even more unpredictable. She had no idea why he came, or why he cut off Boyd's finger. The next second, a cold blade touched her neck, tracing her artery. Erik. He was right behind her, the knife pressed against her skin, as if about to slice her open. Would he? Yes. He had already hurt Boyd. Why? She didn't know. She hadn't said anything about Erik lately. She and Boyd hadn't even mentioned him, but something had angered him. The air seemed to drop in temperature. She heard Erik's breathing behind her, heavy, desperate. Her terrified stillness seemed to excite him, and that was more terrifying than anything else. She had seen him excited before, when he slaughtered the circus guards and the manager. She didn't want to know what he'd do in this state now. Clang. The knife hit the ground. Her heart nearly stopped. She looked down and saw a tall shadow creeping toward her, slowly engulfing her own. Then, warmth. He leaned in and hugged her from behind. The moment Polly felt his weight press down on her, her entire body tensed, mind going completely blank. What was happening? Was this some twisted form of end-of-life care? Or just a new way to terrify her? In this world, he wasn't just a predator. He was the kind that liked to toy with his food. What do you want from me? Polly croaked, her voice hoarse and cracking with panic. She didn't expect him to respond, but to her surprise, he actually spoke. Lawrence Boyd, he murmured in her ear, each word slow and cold, utterly devoid of emotion, is a fraud. That was the funniest joke she'd heard in a while. He had broken into her room for days on end, drawing closer like a cat stalking a mouse, until she was consumed by fear. Just to tell her Boyd was a fraud? Polly's voice was even raspier now, tinged with numbness. I know he's a fraud. I just didn't dare confront him, but thanks for the heads up. You're such a kind, helpful person. You knew? His tone was flat, but the words chilled her to the bone. He had never strung together so many sentences before. Yes, his voice was beautiful, the kind that sent electric shivers down her spine. But hearing so many words in a row from him didn't bring her any comfort, only the creeping sense of impending death. Polly actually missed the days when he didn't speak at all. Back then, she only needed a hug or a kiss to escape death. Now she had to answer questions. Questions that might not even have a correct answer. And if she got it wrong, would she end up like Boyd, minus a finger? Polly clenched her fists, doing her best to calm her pounding heart. There was an Austrian doctor named Mesmer, she began, her voice trembling. He treated patients by making them drink iron filings dissolved in water, then touch them with magnetic rods. Because many of his patients were aristocratic ladies, even the slightest touch made them react intensely, so they deeply believed in his methods. Boyd's techniques, she continued, calming down slightly, probably borrowed from Mesmer's. If this were a quiz show, she might have advanced to the next round. Unfortunately, this was a lunatic's game. Right or wrong, it all depended on his judgment. Polly hoped he wouldn't speak while deciding. She was terrified when he didn't speak, but even more terrified now that he did. What the hell had happened these past few days? How had a mute learned to talk? Her wish went ungranted. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze heavy and unsettling as it lingered on her. Then he asked, "What else do you know?" Polly blinked, confused. "About Mesmer? That's all I know. I do know he laid the groundwork for hypnosis. Anything?" Polly struggled to think of something to say. "Could you give me a topic?" Erik wrapped a hand around her throat, his gloved thumb pressing against her windpipe in warning. His voice remained steady. "Don't make me impatient." His body radiated heat like a high-powered furnace, but the black leather gloves were ice cold, raising goosebumps across her neck. Polly understood. He had grown tired of the hunt. Now he wanted to play 1001 Nights. She had to be like Scheherazade, telling story after story, new and fresh, just to survive. What kind of person came up with this? Thank God she was a modern woman, raised on books, movies, and games. She didn't dare imagine what he'd do to a 19th century local girl. Untraveled, uneducated, unaware. Talking about Mesmer again, she stammered. His methods were a foundation for later hypnosis, because his therapy involved two critical elements. First, using the iron water to create psychological suggestion, and second, leveraging crowd psychology to amplify the hypnotic effect. In the dark, Erik stared at her from behind, his white mask expressionless like wax. But his eyes held a heat that could melt that wax, burning, terrifying emotion she couldn't name. She was timid, greedy, full of herself. Everything from her gaze to her breath, her every movement made him deeply uncomfortable. She made him feel exposed, because one day she would take off his mask and look at him, with eyes like wet ink tracing over his bare face. Just the thought filled him with unbearable shame. The urge to kill her surged, cut off the threat at its root. But somehow, she always escaped his hands. And that was strange. He had never shown mercy to anyone. His parents had said he was insane, mentally unstable, prone to violent outbursts. If not locked up in an asylum, he'd go mad and kill everyone. So they had him locked in a high-risk ward. Waterboarding, beatings, electroshock, and nightly forced prayers. Even now, the sound of bells made him hear the murmured prayers of the other madmen. When the caretakers discovered his unusual face, they began using him for entertainment, ripping off his mask and forcing him to appear in front of others. It was like being skinned alive. They tried to make him speak, then mocked his voice when he did. "If you're not insane, how can you look like that? And sound like that? You were born wrong. You're sick. You'll snap one day." But he never snapped. He planned carefully, methodically, and escaped the asylum with a clear mind. There wasn't much in the asylum, but there were books, donated by rich families who wanted to lock away inconvenient relatives while pretending to be charitable. Other than the Bible, most books were untouched, left to gather dust. Ironically, he learned far more in that asylum library than from his parents. After escaping, he traveled across Europe. He learned music composition, ventriloquism, magic tricks, and how to play various instruments. In India, he learned how to kill with rope. The locals called it the Punjabi noose. Eventually, he settled in the palace of Mazandaran. The Persian king adored him, marveled at his cold-blooded killing, and rewarded him handsomely for redesigning the palace. He had an unnatural talent for architecture. He transformed the royal palace into a maze of deadly traps. A ghost could come and go at will. There were secret passages, trapdoors, shifting walls. No one ever knew where the king was hiding. That was the closest he ever came to living like a real person. Until the king grew wary of his intellect, afraid he might turn on him, and ordered his execution, along with everyone who had ever worked with him. A Persian friend he had once helped saved his life. But the man didn't dare keep him around, so he handed him off to a circus manager, hoping they'd help him escape the region. Since then, he had stopped speaking. Words were useless. They changed nothing. People only heard what they wanted to hear, saw what they wanted to see. Most of all, whenever he spoke, he heard the caretakers' voices echo in his ears. If you're not insane, how can you look and sound like that? His face was shame. His voice was shame. Polly had never judged his voice, but every time he spoke, she got goosebumps. She was someone who'd do anything to survive. Kind to anyone as long as it kept her alive. He had no reason to spare her. That day, she thought he had left, but he had been right beside her all along, a knife in hand, ready to stab her through the back. Then suddenly, she took off her shirt and trousers and changed into a floral dress. Even though he already knew she was a girl, the sight still overwhelmed him. She was so pale, like a wave of white crashing into his vision. His first instinct was to look away, but there was no escape. White knees, white calves, white ankles, white toes. An indescribable emotion surged up his throat. His heartbeat thundered. The discomfort returned, scalp prickling, eyes aching, hair standing on end, as if he had swallowed something dark, viscous, and rotten. And now even his heartbeat felt sticky. At first, he thought the reason he hadn't killed her that day was because he had seen something he shouldn't have. But days passed. She never wore that dress again. And still, he didn't kill her. She was careless. Anyone could follow her. He had intended to kill her when she went to the theater with Boyd. But somehow, he cut off Boyd's finger instead. Maybe there was no reason. He just always hated people who flaunted themselves. These past few days, he had stalked her like prey in a trap, tightening the net until she had nowhere to run. Every day, he told himself, tomorrow I'll kill her. But each time, he delayed until the next day. Finally, he made up his mind. She would die by his hand. Why not now? He approached her from behind, watching as his shadow slowly engulfed hers. The blade traced her pale neck. Boyd had touched her neck too. She was so defenseless. Anyone could touch her throat. That thought made him furious. For a few seconds, the urge to strike boiled in his veins, a seething hiss in his ears. But when he saw her, trembling, sweating, eyes wide with terror, his first instinct was to hold her. Every time she was scared, she hugged him. He thought he had trained her well, that no matter how bad things got, she'd calm him down with kisses and embraces. But in the moment when he truly wanted to kill her, his first reflex was to hug her. Erik was becoming increasingly unpredictable. He had started speaking, rendering all of Polly's previous survival strategies useless. Now she had to scrutinize his every glance, tone, and movement, thinking carefully about every question he asked and what he might really mean, just to avoid saying the wrong thing and ending up dead. That morning, Polly woke up to find a dress on the bed. A new one, a pale blue silk dress trimmed with ruffled lace at the collar, cuffs, and hem, cinched at the waist with a cream-colored satin ribbon. Beside it lay layer upon layer of petticoats and a hoop skirt. On top of it all was a postcard, with a pencil sketch of a theater on the back. The front bore just 2 words, written in dark red ink, in a cold but elegant hand. Wear it. Polly, drawing on years of puzzle game experience, immediately understood what he meant. He wanted her to put on the dress and go to the theater. The dress fit perfectly, as if tailor-made, chest, waist, stomach, arms, everything just right. She didn't want to know when he had measured her. Outside the hotel, a carriage was already waiting. The fog was thick, and the coachman had to hold up a lantern to see her face. "You must be Miss Clement," he said. "Been waiting for you. Come on, let's head to the theater." Polly lifted her skirt and nervously stepped into the carriage. She had no idea what Erik was planning with all this effort. Was he going to hypnotize her like in the original story and train her to become a famous soprano? Polly knew herself well enough. She could handle musical theater, but opera was way out of her league. Opera wasn't pop, it was a whole different beast. Anyone who'd seen Phantom of the Opera knew how much he despised talentless hacks. If he found out she was a lost cause, would he just kill her? Polly was sweating bullets. Thankfully, she wasn't there to sing. It was the same theater she'd visited with Boyd. The same venue, same performance, same private box. Erik never showed himself, but she could feel it, his eyes on her. He was always like that, never appearing directly. Polly actually wanted to tell him he had an amazing physique. His proportions were excellent, especially his fingers, which were unusually long. There was a grand piano in the hotel lobby. When he spread his thumb and pinky, he could easily span 12 notes, even 13. Most people could only manage an octave. 10 notes was already exceptional. And yet, he was deeply ashamed of his face, his hands, his neck, even his voice. He wouldn't let her look at his exposed skin, nor accept any praise of his voice. Polly was confused, his face sure that she could understand. But what was wrong with his voice? "So, what are we doing here?" she asked, trying to break the silence. "It's so stuffy." The theater's ventilation was poor, and she felt like she might suffocate. No answer. Maybe Erik wasn't in the box after all. Just then, the stage lights dimmed, leaving only the footlights flickering. A spotlight hit the velvet curtain, which slowly lifted. A girl dressed as a man appeared on stage. She wore a tilted black top hat and a black tailcoat over a white shirt, singing a cheerful pop tune. It seemed to be Nellie Bly, accompanied only by a banjo. Back when she came with Boyd, Polly had been too distracted to listen. Now, hearing it again, she realized it was a very upbeat folk song. The melody was simple and catchy. After hearing 2 verses, she couldn't help but hum along. Suddenly, a low, cold voice spoke behind her. "You like it?" The hairs on her neck stood up. Her heart almost leapt out of her throat. It's okay. Pretty catchy, she stammered. Why? Was she in a classroom all of a sudden? Being quizzed by a teacher? She wasn't a music major. Thankfully, she trained for musical theater and knew a bit of basic theory, because the melody repeats a lot. Easy to follow and sing along with, she guessed, then quickly added, but of course, I can also appreciate high art, like, The Queen of the Night from the Magic Flute. Love that one. It was the only opera aria she knew. She liked it because of the piercing, whistle-tone high notes, perfect for boosting energy while biking. Erik said nothing, but it seemed her answer passed. After the show, Erik's presence vanished again. So he had arranged the dress, the ribbon, the petticoats, the hoop skirt, and the coachman, just so she could re-watch this performance and hear her thoughts on a simple folk tune. Since then, he seemed to enjoy this little game. Every day, a new dress would appear on her bed. Polly never figured out his goal: testing her musical taste, cultivating her sense of fashion, training her to dress faster. His vague, unpredictable behavior kept her heart pounding day after day, always on edge, dreading the unknown. Pounding heart, fine dresses, a cramped and sweltering box seat. If he ever showed up face to face, or if she didn't sweat bullets every time he spoke, or if she wasn't constantly terrified of failing to answer his questions, it would almost feel like dating. Polly had considered running away, but every time she looked at the heavy hiking backpack, she fell silent again. She simply couldn't carry it. Of course, no one dies just because they can't carry their bag. If she really made up her mind, she could leave. But she hadn't. Why? Maybe because lately, thanks to better nutrition, her long-delayed period had returned, with a vengeance. Fortunately, she had brought sanitary pads in her bag. After cleaning up, she poured herself a cup of hot tea and looked at the dress on the bed. Suddenly, she felt the overwhelming urge to go on strike, to just not go out today. Maybe because she didn't show up at the carriage as expected, the room door suddenly opened. Erik walked in. There was a gas lamp lit at the head of the bed. He raised a hand, and it went out. No wonder Tricky thought his magic was sorcery. Polly still had no idea how he had burned Tricky's card to ashes. He hadn't appeared for days, and now he seemed taller. Just sitting near him made Polly feel crushed by his presence. He rarely looked at her directly, but maybe because she had disobeyed his command today, his eyes were cold and piercing, almost indecently so. A chill ran from her gut to her scalp. "I'm not feeling well today. Can I have a day off?" she asked. "We can go tomorrow." She had been brave enough to say no because she felt she had been performing well lately, answering all his questions, even making up stories to entertain him. Surely one day off wouldn't get her killed. Erik didn't answer. His white mask seemed to darken, the eye holes swallowed by shadow. "Polly tried again, please. Just today. I promise I'll go with you tomorrow." She took stock of her condition. Aside from feeling hot and sticky, she could probably force herself to go out. Maybe it was better to push through. She was just about to stand when Erik placed a hand on her calf. He had never touched her anywhere except the neck before. Polly's heart dropped like a stone into icy water. "Haven't we been getting along well?" she whispered, panic rising. "You bought me dresses, took me to shows. I answered all your questions. Surely he wasn't going to break her leg for skipping one day. Remember when I said I wanted to start a circus?" She said, heart pounding. "I've been thinking, after all these shows, I have some real ideas now. I haven't even told you my plan yet." His stare was bone-chilling. She had never seen such pure, concentrated killing intent in his eyes. Her throat clenched. She could practically taste the sour sting of adrenaline. "Please don't kill me," she whispered. Finally, he spoke. "Who said I was going to kill you?" Polly froze. His hand still rested on her calf. His voice was cold and flat. "You're hurt." "Who did it?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement, completely certain. Problem was, she wasn't hurt. Polly blinked. Huh? I smell blood, he said. Her eyes widened. Then realization struck. Her ears burned. To this day, many places still treated menstruation as taboo, unclean, impure, not something to be talked about. Even someone as intelligent as Erik had likely never encountered a woman before. It wasn't surprising he didn't know. Still, the situation was unbearably awkward. Her scalp tingled just thinking about it. She wasn't ashamed of her body's natural functions. What made her scalp crawl was Erik's identity. He was her jailer, the one who might kill her at any moment, the greatest threat and the biggest mystery in her life. Yet on another level, he was also her protector. Until he decided to end her life, no one could hurt her. The more she thought about it, the stiffer she became. She could feel the blood rushing faster in her veins. She had to end this. Fast. I don't know what you call it where you're from, she said quickly. But women bleed for a few days every month. It's normal. Thanks for your concern, but I'm not hurt. Silence. Polly calmly sipped her tea. Funny how so few stories ever mentioned this. Yet if the protagonist were male, there'd be graphic detail about wet dreams. Like that was romantic, while this was something to keep hidden. With that thought, she calmed down completely. I know some places think it makes women emotional or hysterical, she said. But trust me, it's just biology. I'm not sick. I'm not injured. Maybe because he had never been around women, Erik didn't react like most men, with shame or discomfort. But his gaze did change, just a little. It was as if, until now, he had only understood she was a woman in theory. But this time, he could smell it. The atmosphere between them seemed to shift, subtly but unmistakably. Polly wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad one. At the very least, Erik now fully recognized that she was a woman. That should be a good thing. Despite being cold and ruthless, able to snap a man's head off with a rope without flinching, he'd always shown a strange sort of chivalry toward women. Ever since she started wearing dresses, he had stopped yanking her by the hair or grabbing her by the neck. Sometimes, he even helped her into the carriage. Polly deeply regretted not switching to skirts from the very beginning. All that unnecessary suffering. She wasn't worried that his awareness of their gender difference would trigger any unwanted thoughts. He was too young. Though in truth, she'd never felt an age gap when interacting with him. His inhuman calm, terrifying intellect, and chilling indifference couldn't be defined by any age. Polly suspected that, given his personality, he might never even experience hormonal urges, not unless he met the original novel's heroine. And it's not like he treated all women differently. In both the original story and its horror adaptation, he was extremely cruel to Carlotta, simply because her singing didn't meet his standards. Polly had no delusions about herself. Sure, she could sing. She'd attended musical theater summer camp, and occasionally played minor roles at small stadium events. She was decent, but not the kind of talent a musical genius would be impressed by. And Erik wasn't just a musical genius. In the original novel, he had helped Garnier with the foundational engineering of the Paris Opera House. He'd constructed a secret lakeside residence between double retaining walls, using the lake as a natural moat and filling the interior with a complex, ever-changing torture chamber. Many had tried to explore it. None survived. He wasn't just the world's top musician. He was also a legendary architect and magician. God knows what other master titles he held. Polly was certain of one thing: the chances of a man like that falling for her were near zero. She'd be thrilled if he simply didn't kill her. Winning his affection? That was practically a suicide mission. Erik was still staring at her legs. He didn't seem to realize how inappropriate that was, or how his gaze had changed. It was like a cat eyeing a songbird. Intense, unsettling. Polly couldn't take it anymore and cleared her throat. So, can I take the day off today? Only then did he seem to snap out of it. His lashes dropped as he gave a small nod. That disturbing gaze finally vanished. After thinking it over, Polly added, "Even if I can't go to the theater today, I can still keep you company." Keep me company? The only form of entertainment in the room seemed to be cards. She did have a few downloaded movies on her phone, but no way was she showing him those. Not with the battery drain. Read, listen to music, eat together. She offered, "Whatever makes you happy." Not even 10 minutes later, Polly regretted offering to keep him company. His presence was too overwhelming, even when he didn't say a word. It was impossible to ignore. He sat beside her, legs crossed, silently reading a book. Polly curled up in bed under the covers. Even though he hadn't looked at her once, and seemed totally engrossed in his book, she felt his aura seeping into every corner of the room. It was suffocating. She gave up and sat up, fishing for conversation. "Wanna chat?" His eyes never left the page. "Go ahead. You've never asked where I'm from." He didn't reply, as if the question didn't even warrant a response. "Aren't you the least bit curious how I know so much?" He flipped to the next page. Polly had only meant to break the awkward silence, but his indifference stoked her competitive streak. "Don't you think I'm pretty well read?" He finally spoke. "Well read?" Polly. She had planned to throw out some facts to spook him a little, but the 19th century wasn't that far from modern times. With 2 industrial revolutions behind it and even Einstein already born, most modern inventions were already in motion. What was she supposed to do? Quote, E=mc2? That deceptively simple formula required an enormous foundation of theory and experimentation. She'd burned through her brain cells trying to explain it. Defeated, she flopped back onto the bed. "Forget I said anything." Then Erik spoke again, his voice cold and low. "Your knowledge is broad, but shallow. It's hard to imagine what kind of education you had." Polly. Compulsory education. Wow. Thanks for the backhanded compliment. She didn't know if it was her imagination, but the tension between them didn't feel quite as sharp anymore. She really wanted to ask, "So, do you still want to kill me?" But she didn't want to ruin the fragile peace. As if sensing her gaze, Erik lifted his head and looked at her. Compared to before, his stare had lost some of its empty vacancy. There was a strange warmth to it now, but looked too long, and that inhuman quality crept back in. Should she ask? The vibe was good for once. If she didn't get some reassurance now, it might be harder later. Her heartbeat slowed, each beat heavy and deliberate. She took a deep breath and asked, "Would you say we're friends now?" No response. He stared at her, his white mask hiding every trace of expression. That unreadable silence made Polly nervous. "Never mind." But he interrupted her. "Go on." She had no choice but to press forward. "If we are friends, could you maybe stop trying to kill me all the time?" Were they friends? He didn't know. All he knew was that every time he looked at her, his eyes throbbed, like they were being pricked by needles. And yet, he started noticing more. Her skin wasn't just pale, it was milk white sometimes, plaster white other times. She was soft, fragile, thin. So thin that the delicate veins beneath her skin were visible. It made his heart race, his throat go dry. The last time he had felt something like this was in the arena, battling death row inmates with a rope. He had always been exceptionally patient, especially while hunting. Never sloppy, but like most predators, he enjoyed toying with his prey, closing in slowly before delivering the final blow. After a kill, the arena would be soaked in blood and stench, like a slaughterhouse. It was gruesome. The king, however, had rewarded him handsomely. That was the first time he'd been truly recognized. Maybe the scent of blood had overstimulated his nerves. He could feel his pulse pounding in his temples, heart racing, blood rushing in his ears. That level of excitement was almost pathological. So why did he feel it now? Because he still wanted to kill her? Suddenly, Erik drew his dagger. The blade gleamed, sharp and cold. Polly instinctively shrank back. He leaned forward, one hand bracing against the bed, the other slamming the dagger into the mattress beside her. Polly flinched like she'd been whipped. Her breathing grew ragged. But it wasn't killing intent. He knew clearly he didn't want to kill her. It was more like teasing, like a cat playing with a bird, watching it squirm and flutter. Polly was truly scared. She trembled, eyes wide, staring up at him. Her eyes were crystal clear, black and white like a mirror submerged in water, reflecting his white mask. He couldn't look away. He wanted to see more of her reactions, so he lifted the knife and gently pressed the tip against her abdomen. The fabric dipped slightly. She was so soft, so fragile. All it would take was a little pressure, and she'd be even softer, weaker, like a pat of butter ready to be carved. Polly was frozen, her fear a cold wash at her temples. Her heart felt like it would burst from her throat. She didn't feel killing intent from him. He didn't want to kill her. But maybe because she was so scared, she couldn't shake the feeling that, just for a moment, He did want to sink the blade into her stomach. It wasn't quite murder. It was something stranger, some twisted form of aggression. It made her skin crawl, but it also made her knees weak. Polly regretted everything. Why had she opened her big mouth? Why not just let him sit and read? The next second, the pressure on her stomach disappeared. He tossed the knife aside and went back to reading, never answering her question. Polly stared at the blade, swallowed hard, her stomach still cold with fear. After a massive adrenaline spike, the brain tends to fog over. Like now, her mind flashed with the strangest thought: getting close to a wild animal was risky. But if you managed to tame it, the sense of accomplishment would be incredible. After all, he had tried to kill her multiple times. But this time, it felt more like teasing. As terrified as she was, she couldn't help feeling a flicker of pride. It was like leveling up in a game, unlocking new dialogue with a character you'd been grinding affection points for. She wanted to keep going, to see what else she could unlock. Polly thought she might be going insane. She was in danger, barely surviving, and yet for the sake of some abstract achievement, she wanted to get even closer. She actually believed she could tame him, but the adrenaline he gave her felt amazing. Polly wiped the sweat from her brow, her whole body hot and sticky. She decided to shove all these crazy thoughts aside and go ask for some hot water to clean up. Before she left, she paused and turned back. "Oh, Erik, have you bathed recently?" He paused, lifting his head from the book. Polly pulled on her coat, walked to the door, and tossed out the rest. "You know, the human body sheds a lot of oils and sweat daily due to metabolism. It's important to stay clean." He probably didn't understand. Metabolism wasn't even a concept in this era, but she only said it to counter his broad but shallow jab. And then she bolted. A full 15 minutes passed. Finally, Erik tilted his head slightly and sniffed his own collar. Since arriving in town, he'd been bathing regularly. But just now, he had broken a sweat from the excitement. Had she smelled it? Strangely, the thought didn't bring him the usual shame, like when someone saw his face or heard his voice. Maybe because animals always use scent to mark territory. Suddenly, Polly realized something. Was Erik taking her to all these performances lately because she had once mentioned wanting to start a circus? Right now, it was just the two of them. If they really planned to build a circus, they definitely need to recruit more performers. The thought hit her like a light bulb going off. No wonder he'd been dragging her to shows. He was helping her scout talent. Good thing she had been paying attention to every act. If Erik suddenly asked her which performer she liked best and she couldn't answer, she might actually die. She had a few in mind already: the cross-dressing beauty, the animal tamer, the disfigured performer, and a duo of giants and dwarfs. As for why she specifically wanted a disfigured performer, that had its own logic. Erik still hadn't told her why he wore the mask. She had a hunch this was going to be a turning point in their relationship. But she couldn't just come out and say, "I know you look scary, take off the mask." So she needed a workaround, like hiring a disfigured performer to subtly send the message, "I don't care what you look like." Whether Erik would pick up on that, she had no idea. Polly, ever the diligent worker, planned to take a bath and then write up a business proposal for Erik. But when she got back to the hotel room, he was already gone. She sighed in relief. Sure, spending time with Erik was thrilling, but just like salt, a little bit added flavor. Too much could kill you. She flagged down a hotel attendant, gave him a bit of money, and asked him to buy a few notebooks. Turns out, the manager's wallet had even more cash than she expected. Back then, a male laborer working for an entire year might earn around $300. The manager had over 1,000, not including the foreign currency. Polly had to take several deep breaths just to resist the urge to grab the cash and run. 10 minutes later, the attendant returned with the notebooks and a letter saying a gentleman had asked him to deliver it. Polly had a bad feeling but kept her expression neutral. She accepted the notebooks and the envelope with a polite "thank you." Obviously, it had to be from either Tricky or Boyd. She couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. Erik had left too quickly. What if the letter was full of manipulative, slanderous nonsense? If Erik had been here, she could have just handed it to him and said, "You deal with it." Muttering under her breath, she opened the letter anyway. No point overthinking, she'd read it first. If anything seemed off, she'd just toss it to Erik when he got back. To Miss Polly Clement, I apologize for not writing sooner. I had an unfortunate accident. My finger was severed by a violent man. These past days have been agonizing. I feel like a broken person and have refused to leave my room. It was Mr. Tricky who convinced me to face the world again. Even in such pain, I have not forgotten the favor you asked of me. There will be a gathering this Saturday at Mrs. Healy's home, attended by several renowned mediums. I managed to secure a spot for a companion and would like to invite you to join me. Address: 128 Garden Villa Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. Sincerely, Lawrence Boyd. Polly hadn't expected Erik to not kill Boyd, just cut off one of his fingers. Maybe it was because she'd brushed shoulders with death so many times since transmigrating, but she found herself surprisingly cold. She honestly thought someone like Boyd deserved worse. God knows how many women he'd scammed with his medium shtick. And those women weren't necessarily rich heiresses. Some could have been poor girls, desperate and vulnerable. Historically, mediums never offered their services for free, which meant Boyd was likely a con artist and a predator, after both money and sex. Sure, the 19th century had the beginnings of women's movements, but most of it centered around voting rights, book clubs, and unions. It wasn't until the 1960s that sexual liberation really took off. Back now, women might have intellectual freedom, but their bodies were still under strict control. Just like those cross-dressing performers. On stage, they could cut their hair short and wear suits, strutting like gentlemen. But off stage, they had to switch back to dresses, or face charges for indecency. Imagine what happened to the women Boyd deceived. Polly closed her eyes, lashes low, and tucked the letter into a drawer before turning to write her circus proposal. That evening, when the server brought up dinner, he also handed her 2 more letters. Expression blank, Polly opened them. To Miss Polly Clement, I know you read my last letter. I no longer have the courage to face you, so please forgive me for writing again. In your eyes, am I nothing more than a charlatan? Please believe me, I truly am a medium. The day I touched you, I saw incredible things in your blood. You have a mysterious origin. Unfortunately, I lack the skill to interpret the visions I saw. That's why I invited you to the gathering, to find those who can help you. The women attending are genuine, respected figures in the spirit world. I hope you won't dismiss them because of me. Sincerely, Lawrence Boyd. The other letter was from Tricky Terry. Dear Polly, or should I say, Mr. Clement? Don't worry. I'm good at keeping secrets. I won't report your little disguise to the morality police. If I'm not mistaken, Erik is the one who chopped off Boyd's finger, right? You're quite the bold little lady, sneaking around with the devil himself and never saying a word about it. But you're cute, so I'll forgive you. In fact, I'm willing to tell you something your old boss never knew. Erik's background isn't what you think. He's not just some poor abused boy. His looks might rival the devil's, but his past? It's something that would make even the devil tremble. You've probably heard he's a master of trapdoors. But did you know he was once a prized servant of the Persian king? The Persian man who helped him escape told me, the most ordinary building, once touched by Erik, turns into a horrifying maze. Every sound, every word echoes through hidden corridors. Listened to, monitored, and used. Even though he's long gone, people still whisper, afraid he's eavesdropping from the shadows. Imagine it. Everything you say, everything you do, constantly watched. No matter where you go, he's there. Like your shadow. You're a clever girl. Tell me, do you really want to be around someone like that? Do you really think you're safe with him? Want to escape? 128 Garden Villa Street. Don't be late. Tricky Terry. Polly finished all 3 letters, tucked them away, and got ready to hand them to Erik the moment he returned. Trying to sow discord? Drive a wedge between her and Erik? Not a chance. If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Nuevi Story. Thanks for listening.